Rather than thinking about what you can't do, perhaps you should think about what you can do.
You may remember the quaint children's cartoon based on the beloved French children's book, Babar. He was the king of the elephants who lived in Africa. His stories were about problem solving and becoming a better person. Yet despite being a delightful, casually entertaining series for kids, Babar very much has all of the makings of a shonen. Is this possible? Well, let's take a look at all of the similarities they have through all of the major components of shonen. Firstly, the structure of the show is very much like a shonen in the way that it frames the growth of the main character, Babar. Babar, throughout most of the series, calls back to important moments or episodes, as Babar is primarily an episodic program where he goes on some type of journey and learns something about himself or the world. Babar then uses this new knowledge to inform his maturation as a king. This is quite like many shonen where the protagonist seeks the knowledge and wisdom to obtain their ultimate prize, to become the person capable of upholding the mantle they seek.
We all have responsibilities to others. I found that out the hard way.
Now, training arcs are very common to shonen, and although Babar doesn't have a typical training arc, he does have something that could be read as a training arc, which is his time away from Africa, his homeland, in France. Babar lives with Madame in France, where he studies the Western world and learns what he needs to become to be a competent king that can lead his elephant country to peace and prosperity. This peace he seeks from poachers that killed his mother. And although this particular plot element has been criticized as supportive of the ravages that colonialism had on the African continent, as Babar uses his knowledge of Western culture to elevate Elephant Land and Celestville, it can also be read as a tool Babar uses to combat colonialism in the form of the colonial dark emissary, the poacher, which was Elephant Land's first encounter with what could be considered an aspect of colonialism. Babar's task is then to learn enough about this foreign world to be able to combat them for the sake of his people. Very shonen.
Knowing your opponent makes you a formidable adversary. I knew the ways of the hunter, and so I was able to get the better of him.
Babar has also a rival in the form of Lord Rataxis, a rhinoceros in the neighboring kingdom. Rataxis is a huge antagonist of Babar, and besides generally not liking him, battles him for resources and remains generally envious of the prosperity of the Elephant Kingdom. This isn't unlike most shonen who have anti-heroes or rivals that play a large part in the growth of the main, as it is that rivalry that propels the main character into improving themselves.
Well, that was a long time ago, Alexander. But it's surprising how people who are different can come together to achieve a common goal.
Babar is also the king of the elephants, something that he was appointed to after leaving the elephants to become savvy enough to defeat the poacher, which he ultimately does defeat. It is that bravery and leadership that made him worthy of such a title. Much like shonen where the main character is somehow inherently or secretly greater than other characters or seeks a title or position of honor or excellence.
And I invited them over for a visit.
Sounds like fun. So what's the problem?
Babar the series also has a time skip of sorts. Many shonen include a time skip in which the characters go on some type of personal growth journey away from the screen and return with greater powers or knowledge to tell new stories or continue the final chapter of their own. The beginning half of Babar involves him telling the stories of his past, how he became the king of the elephants, and the trials that he went through to ensure that his people were all taken care of through the stories that he tells his 4 children to help them with their problems. Yet in the latter part of the series, the format changes and no longer is Babar telling stories of the past, but now as a full-grown elephant and not a child king. The audience gets to see the stories and lessons of his children and how they grow and learn, and how their lessons and his own tests are different years later, where adult Babar must face new trials. This jump from child or adolescent Babar to adult Babar can be viewed as a time skip.
I'm sure there's a logical explanation to all this. In the meantime, we need something to eat.
Also, along with any time skip, you might find that the story has produced a second generation. Babar's children are the inheritors of the Elephant Land traditions and crown, much like in many shonen like Naruto or the Seven Deadly Sins, which seems to be a tradition in this series as 2010's Babar and the Adventures of Babar follow his grandchild years later. Babar wasn't the most exciting series, as a lot of its appeal came from its humble and thoughtful storytelling. There also weren't many times when the stakes were high in the series. However, what it presents in its format on face value was a show with a lot of intrigue. It breaks the bounds of the typically episodic programming of most programs for its primary demographic, which is most likely children 8 or younger, and tells some stories that are serialized and weaves a narrative about an elephant who made it through hard trials, not just for himself, but for his people, and becomes a great king in the process. Certainly a great nostalgic series to remember and come back to and watch with the children in your life, because it follows a lot of the conventions of a typical shonen that many adults enjoy. It is also proof that just because a show is made for kids doesn't mean it can't be smart.